Welcome back everybody. Today we have a bit of a fun video for you. As I mentioned recently, or as I've mentioned many times over the past few videos, we are in the dead of winter here. So it's quite cold. I'm wearing some pretty bold fragrances on a daily basis. And the other day I just had this thought of pulling out all of my most bombastic fragrances and figuring out how many really loud fragrances I actually have, because I don't typically consider myself to be someone who gravitates towards really loud, bold fragrances. But I think having been through this exercise, I have actually surprised myself in terms of how many really bold fragrances I actually do have. So when I talk about bombastic fragrances, I'm talking about ones that are fairly bold in their scent profile and project a fair bit. Most of the time they'll be fairly long wearing as well, although I think there's a couple in this list that tend to die down relatively quickly, maybe within the first few hours, but they certainly last all day, but they may not project all day long. But when they are projecting in that opening, it's very noticeable and people around you will smell you. So I have 15 fragrances to talk about today. And first up, we have Au Coeur du Desert by Andy Tower. This is one that I had on my wish list for a really, really long time. And then finally, I received it as a birthday gift a couple of years ago. And then I haven't worn it that much. I've worn it a little bit. I think I wore it a fair bit in the first year that I had it. It is my scent of the day today because when I did this list, I sort of pulled this to the front and thought, I want to make sure I wear this. This is a very dark, dry, incensey, woody rose scent. It has a very similar dry, ambery base to L'air du Desert Marocain, but this is really amped up, I think, with the woods and the rose, and it's very dark and it's very spicy and very dry, and I really do love it, so I do really need to wear this more often. This is one that I often think, I can only really wear it in the really cold months, or I can't wear it all year round because it'd be too much in the summer months. But I really do feel every time I spray it on or I smell it, I realise that dry, spicy nature of that ambery base, I think really does lend itself quite well to wearing all year round. This is much stronger, I think, than the L'air du Desert Marocain. I think the L'air du Desert Marocain has less rose in it. It's slightly less woody as well, I think, and so it's a little bit more airy and light. So that probably does lend itself more to wearing it all year round compared to this one. But I think you can still get away with this one. You just have to be mindful of where you apply it and how much. Next up, we have Superstitious by Frederic Malle. This fragrance started my love affair with aldehydes in perfume. I still remember exactly when I first wore this. I had a decant of it that I had bought on a whim, and I was travelling at the time. I was interstate visiting my parents, and I was heading back to the airport that day to fly home. It was the dead of winter. It was a really cold, crisp, sunny, wintry day, and I was wearing lots of layers, and I decided to spritz this a couple of times underneath my layers. And I wasn't sure if I'd be able to even smell it because of all the layers I was wearing, but as it turns out, it was the perfect amount to spray on because I could smell it, but it wasn't overpowering. This is a very strong fragrance, but because of the way that I was wearing it, and it was the first time I'd ever worn it on skin, I just found myself really enjoying the very clean, very waxy, bitter, slightly soapy composition of this for the few hours that we had to drive to get to the airport. This has a very bold opening that is quite bitter and clipped, but not unpleasantly so. It doesn't have that sparkly aldehydic element that can sometimes be sharp or sometimes sour in other aldehydic fragrances. It does soften as it wears and becomes less kind of punchy and bitter and in your face, but it is very strong, so it lasts a really long time. And I think you really need to apply it to skin to really open up that floral bouquet that's in here, because otherwise I think that the sort of more waxy aldehydic elements tend to stick around longer without those florals coming through if it's just sprayed on, say, clothing, for instance. There is a little bit of a vintage vibe to this one, and I think I do have a lot of trouble discerning individual notes with it, other than to say it's sort of just this aldehydic floral, but I really, really enjoy it. And if you do like those sort of vintagey aldehydic fragrances, then maybe this is one worth trying. Next up is one that I'm sure you're all familiar with already. This is Soir by Maison Francis Kurkdjian. This opens up with a really fresh, spicy, zesty, woody opening on an ambery base. And a lot of people talk about this being a very masculine amber scent, and I do agree. I think that that opening does lean itself to feeling more masculine. I think because there's some citruses in there, and you've got that really spicy aromatic element in there as well in the opening. But in the dry down, this becomes a really soft, warm, cozy, sweet amber fragrance, and I really, really do like it a lot. This is definitely one of my favourite ambers for sure. It has projection, and it has this really airy quality to the sillage, but when you get closer into the scent bubble, it's a lot denser and it's very engulfing. But strangely, I think because of these sort of aromatic, spicy elements in there, which I think do remain, but they just become more muted as it dries down. I think because of the presence of those sort of elements in here, I don't find myself becoming too overwhelmed by it, even though this lasts, a good 10 hours really. So it's an extremely long wearing fragrance. It projects really well. And I personally find the opening to this to be one of my favourite parts of the wear. I mean, because let's face it, a lot of amber fragrances have a lot of similarities to them, and they all kind of feel pretty much the same. But this one, in that opening, entirely different. So I really love the transition of that really fresh, clean, bright opening to a more dense, cosy, enveloping amber base. Next up, we have another one that I lusted after for a really long time, years in fact, before I finally got around to buying it. And again, I bought it and I think I wore it twice, and then I haven't worn it again since, which seems to be a bit of a theme with a lot of these really bold fragrances. I really have to pick my days and my moments for wearing them, because I really struggle to wear really loud fragrances on a regular basis. But this is Superstitious by Olfactive Studios, and I really do love the presentation of these bottles as well, although admittedly they are a little bit awkward to hold in the hand. I wish they came in a 50ml version, which might have been a little bit smaller and maybe slimmer and easier to hold, but that's neither here nor there. You only hold these things for a few seconds, let's face it. So this is sort of a gourmand leaning chypre that is really intriguing and kind of weird. It's very sweet, which is not something I typically associate with a chypre. And it has like these coffee and tea notes, which a lot of people seem to complain about not getting, but I definitely do pick up on the coffee note. And I think later on I get more of a tea vibe to it, but they aren't notes that are super prominent, but they're definitely there. And I think they, in conjunction with maybe some other sweeter notes in here, tend to give the effect of, for me, sort of like a chai latte type of thing, whereas, I get a little bit of coffee, but I also get this sort of milky kind of spice to it. And sorry about the lighting, there's lots of clouds today and the sun's going in and out. But then the other thing about this is that it is of course a chypre, so it has these mossy notes to it. And there's some aromatic notes in here as well, I think. In the opening, you sort of get more of the spices like the cardamom and the saffron, but then it sort of settles into this sort of gourmand phase where maybe it's not gourmand, but you definitely sort of get this coffee, milky coffee or chai latte type of scenario going on. But then eventually those sort of fade to the background, and what you're left with is a mossy, ambery base, which is really still very, very interesting. A lot of people complain that they feel like this doesn't last very long. I think that this lasts a long time on me. I can certainly detect it for a really long time, and it is one of those ones where, though it's very interesting, sometimes I really have to be up for the commitment of wearing it, because it actually does last so long on me that sometimes I get a bit over it. However, I don't think it's a huge projector for a really long time, but when you first put this on, my experience with it is that I feel like I'm projecting all over the place, and I can smell it very strongly. So for that reason, it's made it onto this list. All right, next up is probably one of my favorites in this list. This is Crimson Rocks by Amouage. This has a really bitey, peppery opening, which I love, and it's got lots of cinnamon in it as well, and that cinnamon is really dry, and the pepper just launches it off your skin. It's really quite different. But if you don't like pepper or cinnamon as the main spice notes, then this probably wouldn't appeal to you, because that dry cinnamon and that pepper does stick around pretty much for the whole wear, although they do sort of die down and they're not quite so bombastic as it sort of settles down over the course of a few hours. And then after a little while, the sweeter notes start to emerge a little bit more. The sweeter notes being, I think, sort of a honey coupled with rose in the mid. It doesn't really smell like honey per se, but what I get from this is I sort of initially, when I smelled this, I thought it had an amber base, but apparently there's no amber accord in here. So I'm wondering if maybe the honey maybe contributes to that and gives it that ambery feel. I struggle with honey notes in fragrances quite a lot. So if I'd known there was honey in here, I may have held off trying it for a bit longer. But as it turns out, I actually really enjoy the honey note in here. I think it's quite clean, it's quite smooth, it's not too animalic, and it's not too sticky. So for that reason, I think it's quite beautiful. I feel like the sweetness of the honey is counterbalanced by some woody notes in the base. There is rose in here as well, but I feel like the rose sort of comes and goes for me. But it does impart this really lovely softness to it, really balances out the sharpness, I guess, of the woody notes and the sweetness of the honey. And overall, it feels very formal. It has phenomenal lasting power. I sprayed this on a jumper before I moved into this house, and a few months after we moved into this house, I wore that jumper again, and I could still smell it on that jumper quite clearly. So yeah, on skin it lasts hours and hours and hours, but on clothes it lasts a phenomenally long time. So just be warned. And overall, I think I find myself wanting to make a comparison of this to Grand Soir because of that really spicy, peppery opening. And I think that even though this isn't technically an amber fragrance, I want to say that I think that for those people who find Grand Soir to be too masculine leaning for them, this might be an alternative, even though it's like they're entirely different fragrances, and this isn't even an amber, but I feel like this feels ambery to me, but it's got that rose in it. So yeah, I feel, if you are somebody who doesn't like Maison Francis Kurkdjian because you think that aromatic tone makes it feel too masculine for you, then maybe this is worth a try. All right, next up we have Lipstick Rose by Frederic Malle. I have kind of a love-hate relationship with this fragrance. In principle, I really love it, but most of the time it's just too much for me to wear. So I really can only wear this for the coldest of coldest days. It is straight up a very dense, powdery rose from the very outset as soon as you spray this. The rose has a sweetness to it that's almost too sweet, which coupled with the denseness of the maybe it's just the iris or whatever else is in here, but it's a very dense, powdery, full-bodied perfume. And I don't know, I think that the sweetness of that rose, I think it's coupled with a raspberry note or something, is just arguably toothachingly sweet. So you really do need, in some ways it's really lovely and it has this really vintage feel to it. But on the other hand, it can be very sickly, it can be very cloying, and it's quite a difficult one to wear, I think. It is so easy to overdo this one. If you spray too much, it's just too much. So I have to be very careful about how I apply this one. It does stick around for a really long time. The dry down is really nice though. You know, that sweetness sort of balances out, the powderiness settles down, and it just becomes this really lovely powdery rose that has, you know, that vintage makeup element or feel to it. So it does, you know, it does settle down eventually, but that opening is, whew, it's loud. The only way that I wear this fragrance is under clothing. Most of the other fragrances in this list, I can bear to wear them just on skin, but not this one. I have to wear it. Well, I have to wear it on skin. I wear it on skin, but I have to wear it under clothing to kind of give me a barrier between this and my nose. I have this massive bottle of it though, which I bought off a friend who, you know, just had the same problem with it that I do, I think. If I hadn't had that opportunity, then I think the travel size would have been more than enough to last me decades probably, because it's going to take me, I will never get through this bottle because I literally just spray it once, possibly twice when I wear it, and that's it. Okay, so next up we have Guerlain's Shalimar Millesime Vanilla Planifolia. I've talked about this before fairly recently too, because I mean I only bought this bottle I think late last year or possibly even in January this year. I haven't tried the Parfum version of Shalimar, but I think that this is probably the most bombastic version of Shalimar that I have ever tried. The EDP is also quite strong and is very interesting, but this one is the one that if I put it on, I know I'm smelling it all day long, much to my detriment in some cases, because I can get over this fragrance within a few hours' time and then I really am done with it and I want to move on. It is just so strong and persistent in its presence. This does smell like the original Shalimar, although I probably don't get as much of the leathery tones. Maybe I get a little bit of leathery, sort of a leathery element, maybe a suede-y element to it, but the vanilla in here is just amped up to 11, you know, it's been overdosed in here, and that is why I think I struggle to wear it during the day, because if I wear it to work or something, I find that by lunchtime I'm almost feeling ill from the amount of vanilla that I'm smelling. It's just too much vanilla for me. It's a very realistic, concentrated vanilla, like I've just opened a bottle of vanilla extract and I've just shoved my nose in it, you know, that's kind of what it smells like. But it has these beautiful elements of Shalimar in there, in that amber, but the vanilla just overtakes everything else. And for a little while, I really enjoy it, but then after a while, it's just a little bit too much. So for that reason, I like to wear this usually for things where I know it's going to be a cool evening and I'm going to be out and it's sort of a casual kind of atmosphere, maybe going to the movies, or maybe we're dining al fresco somewhere and I'm wearing a few layers. That's when I sort of enjoy this fragrance the most, because then I know I'm only going to be out for a few hours and I can come home and I can wash it off if I find it's getting too much. Sometimes I have worn it to bed and I found that works really well, because often, you know, depending on how tired I am, I can fall asleep and sort of forget that I'm even smelling it. But yeah, I find it's a good bed scent because of that vanilla. But yeah, during the day, I think it can just get a little bit too much, especially if I'm running around, you know, if I'm at work and I'm running between offices and things like that. And the other thing too is if I'm wearing it in the daytime, and in particularly if I wear it to the office, and the day that I did wear this to the office, I was really quite self-conscious about how, you know, other people were perceiving me, because it just was so vanilla-y. And I work in a really, I don't know, very casual, male-dominated environment, and it's not the kind of place where I want to walk around smelling like vanilla, put it that way. So, it was not a great choice for that day. You know, there are moments when I do enjoy wearing it, but those moments generally involve me not having to wear this for 10 hours straight. Next up is Kintsugi by Masque Milano. This is an incredible fragrance as far as I'm concerned. I wear it sparingly because A, I don't want to use it up, but B, it lasts a really, really long time and it's quite powerful. It's a very elegant perfume, I think, and it also really packs a punch, which is obviously why it's on this list. It's just a golden wash of florals and sort of these dry, grassy tones, even though I don't think there's any specific notes in here that impart overtly a dry, grassy tone, but that's just what I get from it. It has a little bit of sweetness to it, but not too much. And that sweetness does develop more during the wear, I think. And the sweetness, I think, is coming from fruity notes, although I don't know if I necessarily detect it as fruity notes, although when I spray it in the air, it definitely does smell a little bit fruity. Whereas when I put it on my skin, the fruity tones are played down compared to the floral and maybe some of the woodier notes in here. It's not a vanilla-y sweetness, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So it doesn't have a denseness to it. It's very translucent and airy. It's a little bit green. It's a little bit bitter. It's a little bit floral. It's a little bit suede-y. It's a bit vintage smelling. It's also a little bit smoky, I think, in the dry down. I think on my skin, even just smelling it straight from the atomizer, I feel like I do get a bit of a smoky tone to it, like an ashy, smoky tone to it. But overall, I feel like this is just a really lovely, golden, bright fragrance that has a bit of depth to it as well due to some other elements, but it's not dark. It changes so much during the wear that half the time I just don't even know what's going on with it, really. And that is the beauty that is Kintsugi, I think, because I remember when I bought this a couple of years ago, I read some reviews on it, and the only consistent thing with there were only two consistent elements with all of the reviews that I read. One was that there were no consistent elements. Everyone had a different opinion of what this smelled like. Some people thought it was really fruity, other people thought it was really smoky, other people thought it was very dry, other people thought it was very floral, and some people even just described it straight up as a rose fragrance, which I definitely don't get. So it was just so interesting to read the reviews and people's, you know, what different people were getting from it. But the other consistent thing across all of the reviews was that this is a very complicated fragrance and it is hard to try and define it. I think it's a very elevated fragrance. I think it's very formal, and it's one of those ones that I hate describing it this way, but it's one of those ones that I would say smells expensive. And I guess it is expensive because I think these go for about 180 Australian dollars for a 30 ml. So yeah, it probably is, you know, they definitely are on the pricier end. The perfumer behind this fragrance is Vanina Miraccioli. I hope I've said that right. And I haven't really heard of her before, but when I looked her up, she has had quite a lot of input, if not all of the input. I don't know, I haven't dived into it too deeply yet, into the brand Jeroboam. And so I'm super curious now to go and try those fragrances because I absolutely love this one, and Matt really likes this one too. Anyway, so that is Kintsugi by Masque Milano. Next up is La Panthère by Cartier. Another very polarizing fragrances. A lot of people really dislike this one. I personally really love it. And the way the bottle is a bit deceptive, but you can see, if I turn it around this way, that I have worn almost half of it. So that's saying something for me. It's very rare that I get to say that I am halfway through a bottle of perfume. Anyway, so La Panthère by Cartier is a fruity sheep. This is another one that I think has a very golden tone, but I don't feel that this is quite as sweet as the Kintsugi. The opening is very bright and tart. It does have a rhubarb note, which at first I would not have picked rhubarb. But now that I think about it, I guess that works. It also has bergamot in the opening, so it has that traditional bright, bubbly sheep feel to it. And then the florals kick in, and it's so good. It has a suede tone to it as well, which I really enjoy. And like I said, everything just smells really light and golden and sort of sparkly, goldeny yellow, you know? Even though it has that rhubarb in the opening, I don't feel like the fruity tones override this fragrance to make it into a fruity fragrance. In fact, already I'm sort of getting more of the suede floral tones than I am fruit. So I think the fruity notes really just help to give that little bit of sparkle and uplift in the opening, and also just to give it a little bit of a lift through the rest of the wear. It dries down to this really beautiful floral, suede, mossy, sort of almost grassy base with hints of musk and patchouli, and I just absolutely adore this one. This one also is very bombastic, and in fact, now that I've spritzed it, chances are I will still smell this in my office for another week. Every time I come down here, I will smell this, despite the fact that I've spritzed other things here today. This is the thing that will jump out at me every time I walk down here now. So it really lasts. There is almost a soapy element to this as well, which I personally really enjoy. But I think maybe that's partly what a lot of people don't like. Well, who knows? A lot of people don't like chypres. So, but again, this is such a polarizing fragrance. People either really love it or they seem to really hate it. And there's very few people who are sort of just on the fence in between. But I personally really love it. It does smell quite vintage, a little bit from another era, but it is absolutely stunning. Although, again, it is extremely long wearing. So if you want to test it and you don't like chypres normally, then just be warned, because once you spritz it on your skin, you'll be stuck with it for a while. I personally would wear this anytime, but I do like wearing this one to work, I have to say. The other thing too, which I forgot to mention, is that there is something that I really hate about this particular fragrance, and that is the atomizer on the bottle. It's probably one of the worst atomizers that I have in my entire perfume collection. Okay, so next up is one that I didn't think I would buy, actually. This is 100 Silent Ways by Nichane. I was originally put off by this fragrance because it is just so sweet. So sweet and loud. And I remember the first time I tried this, I sampled it and I thought, absolutely not. That is totally not my style. I have no interest in smelling that sweet or that loud, because this is very strong. And then I found myself traveling down in Sydney for about a week. I had a sample of this, or a decant of it, from my friend Emma in my travel case, and I was unexpectedly freezing in Sydney on that trip. I was so cold, I just could not get warm at all that week. And consequently, I was wearing pretty much all of my clothes all of the time. I think, you know, the minimum number of layers I wore on any given day was about 3, and 2 of those would have been thermal layers. So I was really cold all week. And when I was putting perfume on, I was finding, you know, unless I sprayed it on my clothes, I wasn't really smelling anything, because by the time I put all the layers on, I couldn't smell my perfume. So I ended up pulling this out of my travel pouch and spritzing it on. And I found that it worked really quite well under 4 layers of clothing. And it would warm up so nicely on my skin, and I was just getting wafts of it through my clothing every once in a while, and it was really, really nice. So I ended up wearing this pretty much every day that entire week that I was there. I ripped through the whole sample, and then I came home and I found myself missing it. I'd obviously become quite addicted to the scent profile of it whilst I was wearing it all that time. So I ended up buying a bottle, and I don't know if I really have that much to say about it other than it's just a very sweet, very strong white floral fragrance. I think there's also some iris in here, but mostly it's like a really sweet tuberose fragrance, and that's pretty much all I get. And it's very crowd pleasing, I would say. You know, for a niche fragrance, it actually smells like, you know, a scent profile that you would probably buy from a department store. Not complaining about that. I really like it. The staying power is incredible, and people will definitely smell you when you put this on. I actually wore this a few weeks ago, and I was wearing another jumper, and I spritzed this onto that jumper very lightly from a distance, you know, just to mist it onto the clothing without having to spritz it directly on my skin. And that jumper, then when I finished wearing it, I took it off and I put it away, and there was another jumper that it was sitting next to, and that jumper now smells like this. So it has also got incredible staying power, and it infuses apparently amongst your clothing items. So just be warned if you want your whole wardrobe to smell like 100 Silent Ways. It's just a really beautiful, sweet white floral fragrance. I have nothing more to say about it. Next up, we have Lost Wanderer by Millesime Parfums. This is an Australian brand, and they're relatively new. I have talked about this one before as well. This reminds me a lot of Tobacco Vanille by Tom Ford, but I find this one to be more wearable. I think the clove note is perhaps toned down a little bit. The vanilla in it is not as overpowering either. So it's just overall less cloying and less sticky, a little bit more dry, a little bit more spicy, perhaps a little bit more woody as well. And I personally prefer this. Matt really, really loves Tobacco Vanille by Tom Ford. But whenever I wear this, he's always asking me, what is it you're wearing again? What is that? Because he can never remember the names of the fragrances, but he knows, like I know which ones obviously that he refers to on a regular basis, and I only ever had a decant of Tobacco Vanille, and he basically commandeered that and took it off my hands because he really, really liked it. And sometimes he wouldn't necessarily wear it himself, he'd just open it and smell it, and he just loved the smell of it. But this one I think is more wearable for me personally, and so I do wear it quite a bit. And you can see I haven't had this for very long, and you know, I'm already making a fair dent in it. So that is Lost Wanderer by Millesime Parfums. All right, we're starting to get to the end now. This has taken way longer than I expected. All right, so this bottle is really dirty because I haven't worn it for a really long time, but this is Oud Bouquet by Lancome. I'm pretty sure everyone has heard about this one. Another very polarizing fragrance. I used to really love this, and now I'm not sure I love it so much. I just find the sweetness in here to be overpowering and very cloying. The oud note is quite sharp in here, so I think that puts a lot of people off as well. But I don't really get it so much as oud. I don't think the oud is very animalic or barnyardy, so I find it to be, you know, quite clean and woody, but there is a sharpness to it, maybe a hint of sourness to it as well, which may be the oud or it might be something else. But basically that praline note in here, coupled with the rose, coupled with the oud and the sort of ambery tones, is just, it is a lot. I agree. And for those people who just can't stand this one, I understand why. But there is something about it that I still really like. Even though I never wear it, I think I do have to reserve it for very, very cold days. You know, that's fine. I'm happy to keep it. You know, there was a time when I thought I might get rid of this, but I don't think so. But I agree, it is not an easy one to wear, and it's not an easy one for people around you to tolerate either. So I do try and pick my moments to wear this one. I think Matt quite likes this when I wear it, so it has to be a really cold day, basically. Next up is one that is definitely no stranger, I'm sure, to anyone watching this channel. This is Coco by Chanel. This is the eau de parfum version. We've got clove, we've got coriander, we've got orange and spices on an ambery base. A bit of incense in there as well. Not smoky incense, kind of resinous. Very vintage smelling, a bit of civet, just to give it a bit of an edge. It's a little bit dark, it's a little bit mysterious. Not super dark though, it's totally wearable all day, every day, and many people do. This is a signature scent for a lot of people, and some people, this is the only scent they ever wear. So very well known, very wearable, very long wearing, I find. And I don't find, if I put this on, I don't feel like I need to respritz it throughout the day. I'm sure it's been reformulated many, many times over the years, but I still think it has excellent wearing power, and other people can smell you, and when other people are wearing it, I can smell them. So this is definitely a worthy one to include on my most bombastic scents. I did think about including Samsara by Guerlain as well, but I find that one isn't a huge projector on me. I find that sits a little bit more close to my skin than this does. I find this really sort of creates a scent bubble and people can smell me. So that is Coco by Chanel, instantly recognisable and a very good performer. And then the last two I want to talk about in comparison to each other, because they're actually quite similar in a lot of ways. The first one is Initio Parfums Atomic Rose, and the other one is Yves Saint Laurent's Blouse. So with Atomic Rose, I really like this one actually, but it's totally, again, not my usual type of thing to go for. But this one has a lot of pepper and bergamot in the opening that keeps it really bright and quite fresh as well. There is a lot of rose in here. I think there's a few different types of rose that are listed in the notes. Turkish rose, Bulgarian rose, and maybe that's it, I'm not sure. And I'm convinced that I get something fruity from this, because I feel like it has this really juicy kind of element to it. But when I look at the note listing, I can't find any fruit notes other than the bergamot listed in the opening. So who knows? Who knows? Blouse, on the other hand, has quite a similar opening. It's got lots of bergamot and pepper, although I feel like I get more of a juicy sort of bergamot from this than I do the Atomic Rose. I think the Atomic Rose, I get more of that pepper. But what's interesting about this one is that it has an element of galbanum and angelica in here, which gives it a very crisp, sharp green tone, in addition to the lovely rose and that lovely bergamot. There is musk in here as well, and there's probably musk in the Atomic Rose as well, but I feel like this has more of a musky green tone in conjunction with lots of rose. Versus the Atomic Rose, which I think is more sort of juicy, sweet rose, maybe with some woody elements in there. This one I struggle with because I find it to be quite piercing. So I love the scent profile, but there's something about I think maybe the green notes that just really can be quite headache inducing for me. So I do wear this under clothes. I can't just spritz it on my wrist, for instance, or I definitely can't wear it on my neck. It just becomes too much. So I really have to wear it under something else to sort of tone down that piercing aspect of it. And then I just get this beautiful, musky, slightly green rose fragrance, which is just beautiful. Atomic Rose, as the name suggests, has also got a bunch of synthetics in there that sort of really launch it off your skin and into the stratosphere. This projects a lot. I think it lasts a long time. I think it projects for a long time. But then again, the way that I wear it, which is usually under a lot of clothing, to try and tone it down a little bit, perhaps it doesn't project as much off me as it would off somebody else who is happy to spritz with abandon and doesn't mind, you know, other people smelling them. I just like to exercise caution just because of the nature of the type of people I work with. Not so much that I don't work in a medical environment. There's no restrictions on wearing perfume where I work, but the kind of people that I work with tend not to be perfume wearing, makeup wearing individuals, you know what I mean? So it's I don't want to stand out too much, and I don't want to stand out too much anyway. But I discovered this one when I was on holiday, and it was sort of ended up being quite a rainy holiday at the beach, and I just loved wearing it. Anyway, so that is Blouse and Atomic Rose. And that is the end of this video. I've had to restart the camera twice. I hope you enjoyed this, and let me know what are the most bombastic fragrances in your collection. I'm curious to know. And how do you wear them, and do you wear them very often? Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up as always, or subscribe if you are so inclined, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.
A little different than all the rest. I'm quite old-fashioned, wear a hat, sometimes played chess.